down here, and I will keep it at this level too, because I don't feel like I'm talking very loudly, and it's really loud. So, well, thanks for being here, and I can't believe the clock back there is correct too. Somebody got here to change those. That's pretty impressive. I know usually when I was working in the hospital, it took like 2 or 3 weeks for all the clocks to look right, so I'm impressed. Well, thanks for being here again, and Daniel Falkenheim is preaching, I believe, in Findlay, Ohio today, so he's not here. Daniel and I we met earlier this week just on a FaceTime call briefly, and talked about the rest of the quarter. You know, interestingly, the book we're in is this foundation series from Gospel Advocate called He Was Here, and there are books in the back still if you didn't get one. I may end up taking this thing off if it continues to be this loud, because I can talk really loudly if I need to. But the book is not exactly what we thought it was going to be when we were told we were teaching. We got the impression it was going to be a more of geography, history of places in the Bible, and it's kind of just, you know, cities that Jesus was in, and we'll throw some stories about what Jesus did in those cities. So it was a little different than what we expected, but we're going to make the best of it and try to figure out how to do this well. I will say there's 1 week here where we'll have a guest speaker, and the elders, maybe not all the elders know this, but at least some elder okayed this, so I won't get in trouble. But a gentleman from Hope for Haiti's Children, his name is Rob Long. He's one of their, I forget his exact title, but Rob's originally from Toledo, Ohio. He now lives outside of Nashville in Lebanon, Tennessee. It's about an hour from Nashville. But he is going to be traveling back from visiting family in Toledo on his way back through. And we've had a long-standing relationship with that organization. Not anything official, you know, per se, but lots of folks here have participated in mission trips and been involved in some of the mission activities like the Joy Boxes that I know Sharon has always been involved in that, and others. So he's going to be coming and talking about that mission work on April 6th, and he'll have a lesson as well with that talk that morning. So just wanted to put that out there so you know that's coming. That's April 6th. Today, we're going to be talking, and I kind of talked April 6th, I said that's going to be, he was not here, Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Jesus wasn't there. But he is working, the Spirit's working there, God is working there through the people, and it's really a mess down there, and I think you'll learn more about that when he comes and talks, what a mess it is in Haiti right now. It's hard to, I don't think we can fathom what it's like there, and it's not really that far from our country. It's about a 2-hour flight from Miami to Port-au-Prince, and just pray for those people that are struggling. So I'm going to see if this thing works, because usually it doesn't work for me. Yeah, Lance, I may have you move slides for me. Maybe this thing will start working later, but there we go. It is work. Did you do that or me? You did it. Okay. I know now. It's not me. Okay. So I will say all scriptures they'll be in italics, and I use the New American Standard Bible, just so you know. Okay. So we're going to talk about Bethlehem today, and if you read the book, if you're doing that in preparation for the lessons, basically the writer of the book series kind of gives us a little bit of background about Bethlehem, and then it goes into talking about Jesus' birth and the visit from the wise men or the magi to visit Jesus and bestow the gifts upon him. And really that's all and I'll say this at the end again, but with Jesus, we don't have any record of Jesus in Bethlehem beyond those events. We don't have any record of his ministry or of any kind of ministry in Bethlehem subsequently. So there's really not much more in the New Testament about Bethlehem other than those stories, which is kind of interesting considering, again, he was born there. Now, again, we know he was not from there. He was from Nazareth, and so we have more from Nazareth and Galilee, obviously, about Jesus, but we don't have anything else about Bethlehem. But I want to talk about the meaning of Bethlehem and some of the geography. And I'm no geographical expert, although I was second in the geography bee in 7th grade. But and I didn't study, so I think that was the most impressive thing about that. The guy that got first was really good, so I don't know how I did it, but I did it. And I had one of those. You have the globes that had the mountains, like where you could feel the rough. Oh, I love that thing. As a little kid, like just looking at that and kind of putting my hands on it and trying to get a feel for what's what. So, but we'll talk a little bit about meaning and geography, and I want to talk a little bit about present-day Bethlehem. Again, not an expert in the Israeli-Palestinian issues. I was learning a little bit from this, but have a lot more to learn about that, and maybe one of these days I will get more up to date on that situation, because it's never going to go away, I don't think, as long as this world stands. There is always going to be an issue over there. I don't think you're ever going to see peace, but that's my opinion and what I've seen from reading the Bible. I think that's the way it's going to be, unfortunately, till this world ends. I want to look a lot of the time today actually is going to be looking at the Old Testament, because I think the Old Testament is where we really get a lot of the a lot more about Bethlehem, honestly, in the Old Testament. So I want to look at those references and some of the characters. And then prophecy, I think, is very important. And we'll look at the passage in Micah together. And then we'll close, and I'm going to read the account of Jesus' birth. Another reason why I didn't want to focus too much on that is because we've been doing the life of Christ on Sunday mornings. We've talked extensively about some of these things. And most of you, I know, have been there for those lessons. So I'm not going to try to rehash that. So we might get done a little bit early today, but that's okay, because like I've always said, I like teachers that let me out a little bit early. So I got a map up here. Lance, you don't mind? Thank you. I got to remember to tell Lance. I got this from Bible Atlas. I try to make sure and give credit where credit is due. If you've been in Brandon Edwards' class, he was talking about, and again, don't mean to get off topic, but I will briefly. He was talking about people that look up church presentations and try to find people that use pictures and slides inappropriately and try to, create legal problems. I never knew that occurred, but Brandon made it sound like it's fairly common. So, but this map I got from Bible Atlas. I signed up for something free, and it let me copy and paste this. But you can see, it's not the best picture, but you can see Bethlehem with the little marker there, the little pin marker, just southwest of Jerusalem by only about 5 miles in Judah. If you look at the territories, it was in Judah. So again, very, very close to Jerusalem. But again, we don't have much about Bethlehem in the New Testament beyond obviously the very important fact that Jesus was born there. There was, from what I've read, another Bethlehem in Israel that was in the province, I call them provinces, but the territory of Zebulun. That would have been in the northern part of Israel. So there were, from my understanding, 2 Bethlehems at one time. I don't know if the northern one honestly still exists. I don't believe it does, but there was one of the judges, and one of those judges that you just basically get like one verse about, Ibzan, who was, it said, from Bethlehem. And from what I read, it's thought that he was from the Bethlehem of Zebulun, so that northern Bethlehem, not the same one that we talk about, most of the time. And then some important things to note. I have this Nelson's New Illustrated Bible Manners and Customs book, which it didn't have a lot on Bethlehem, but I did look at that. Bethlehem was a town on the caravan route to Egypt, so there was some importance to the town, the road, or what you would call it, that route. If people were going to Egypt, and certainly we know Jesus ended up in Egypt, so it was on that route to get to Egypt through Hebron. And then also it was said to be of some importance because Herod had built a couple of fortresses, and you can see Herodium on this map, and then Masada, which I think is down further south. But he'd built these fortresses, and Bethlehem overlooked the roads to those fortresses. So there was some importance to the city because of that as well. Next slide, please, Lance. Thank you, sir. So the meaning of Bethlehem, we know Clay talks about this a lot when he talks about, hey, if you're on Bethel Road, house of God, Bethel. So here we have Bethlehem, Beth meaning house, and house of bread. It was also called, and we'll look at some passages from the Old Testament, it was also called Ephrath or Ephrathah, meaning fruitful. I believe Ephrathah, that name, was a wife of Caleb from the Old Testament, if I'm not mistaken. And this is something I learned again this week, is if you go to 1 Chronicles, you'll find that one of Caleb's, I think it's really his grandson, but his son Hur, and then one of his sons is considered the father of Bethlehem, or kind of the founder of Bethlehem, at least based on what you see in 1 Chronicles. And I believe that is the same Bethlehem we're talking about in Judah. And then I put the passage here, obviously, when we talk about Jesus and where he came from. John 6:35, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. Very interesting that Jesus comes from the town where he was born, in the town that is the house of bread, and he refers to himself as the bread of life. I like bread. I don't know about you, but I like to go to restaurants where they have bread available for you for free, especially, right? I mean, and we go to Cafe Da Vinci around the corner here a lot, and their bread is so good, and you get the olive oil, and so bread is a pretty important thing. I mean, it's been an important thing for a long time, right? It's a fairly simple thing to make, and it's very good, and it gives you sustenance. And Jesus doesn't call himself some food that wasn't available to people on a regular basis. He calls himself a simple thing that provides sustenance, and obviously he's much more than some simple thing. But he's saying, I will provide for you. I am the way, the truth, the life as well. I am the bread of life. You will find what you need in me. You will find all that you need in me. And so again, just the connection to where he's from, I think, is certainly interesting. And I don't know that Jesus called himself the bread of life and used that particular phrase because he was from Bethlehem. He could have, but he could have used a lot of other things too. But I think that's interesting. I'll stop here in a second and make sure anybody doesn't have any comments. But I did. Next slide, please, Lance. So this is a photo I got from Wikipedia. You'll see the source below. But I did want to look a little bit at modern day Bethlehem. This is and I don't know, some of you, I don't know when you go on these trips, and I've never been to the Holy Lands, but are you able to get to Bethlehem? Peggy, have you been there to the Church of Nativity there? Okay. I figure, because obviously it's not truly a part of Israel, right? You have to have to get the Israelis, I don't believe, are allowed in that town, correct? Because it's part of the Palestinian Authority, but it's considered part of that West Bank. I mean, it's obviously not Gaza, but it's all that area that's under the Palestinian Authority. But originally, this church was built by I will say most of the people in Bethlehem now would be Arabs. From my understanding, they're Arab Muslims that live there, majority of the people. But obviously, it's a site has been a site of great conflict, that whole area. But the Church of the Nativity, by tradition, again based on the name, by tradition, Jesus was born at that site. That's why the church was built there, and it was built by the Emperor Constantine, who was really the first emperor that was Christian. And so you've got the start of really the state church through Constantine. It was destroyed by somebody else, and then it was subsequently rebuilt on the same site. And I find that interesting, and I'm sure those of you who have been able to go there found it pretty amazing to see that site. But we hear about modern day Bethlehem pretty much every year around Christmas. You hear about services going on there and what's happening and the safety of the people that are there, involved in that worship and that remembrance of that holiday. But that's modern day Bethlehem at this point. Next slide, please. Any thoughts so far as we move forward? I'm going to get into the more meat, I would say, of the lesson today now. Okay. So the Old Testament in Bethlehem. The first passage that I can find mentioning the old Bethlehem in the Old Testament is regarding Rachel, and from what I've read, it is considered to be obviously the Bethlehem that we read about where Jesus was born. And if you Genesis 35:18, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. We know Rachel died in childbirth. She died after giving birth to Benjamin, and then they must have taken her body on that wherever they were. I don't remember the whole context of the geography there, but they buried her there in Bethlehem. And of course, Rachel being the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, and then of course being the wife of Jacob. So a connection, of course, to Jesus there, because obviously Jesus comes from the lineage of Judah, one of Jacob's sons, but that was not Rachel's son. I believe that was Leah's son, correct? I believe. So Judah was Leah's. Look to my dad today. That's nice to have him here. I can always look and say, am I right? Ruth. Ruth is a great story. I think there were some folks here. Did somebody go? Didn't they do a play of Ruth, I think, last year? I don't know who all went to it. I'm sure it was, I hope it was really good. I bet it was good. I think she's a very amazing character. And we know of Bethlehem through the story of Ruth. Naomi, who was her mother-in-law, was from Bethlehem, and they had to leave Naomi and her husband and then her two sons and their wives. Ruth was her daughter-in-law. They had to leave Bethlehem because of a famine, went to the land of Moab, and then all the men died. And the women are kind of in a bind, especially in that culture, in that time and culture. And Naomi obviously says to the women, you guys can do whatever you need to do. You don't have to help me. But Ruth obviously, and I'm paraphrasing a lot here, but Ruth obviously says, hey, I'm gonna stick with you, and I'm gonna be there for you. And so they return to Bethlehem. And so that's Ruth 1:22 there. And we know then that Ruth, through again the story, Boaz, who is also from Bethlehem, Ruth ultimately marries Boaz, and Ruth and Boaz have a child named Obed, and Obed is the father of Jesse, who's the father of David. So Bethlehem, this is really where Bethlehem starts to become of I would say more prominence in terms of what we think about in the Bible, because here we're starting with the genealogy of Jesus, and specifically though here the grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and so on of King David, who I would say, obviously besides Jesus, the most well-known person from Bethlehem, or born in Bethlehem, would be, I assume he was born in Bethlehem. I guess I should say he was from Bethlehem, King David. So interesting point there, and I think looking at Ruth, that's a good book to look at now and then because it's short, and you could read it easily in like probably 15 minutes in an evening, and kind of update yourself on that history, which I find fascinating. Next slide. I stole this from Amazon. So this is, I just thought this was interesting. Has anybody have Amazon Prime and see there's a new series on David? It's called The House of David. And I've always thought that David would make like the best miniseries. I mean, it has everything, right? It has everything. It's got war. It's got amazing characters like Goliath. I mean, who isn't interested in Goliath? I'm still interested in Goliath. I wonder exactly what he looked like. It's got plenty of what people like nowadays, all the sexual sin. It's got plenty of that, okay? It's got it all. So it just fits with like a modern day miniseries. And I've always wondered why. I'm sure there have been some things out there made about David. I've not seen them, but this is the first kind of major production I've seen. I'm not promoting it. I've watched the first 2 episodes, and I find it interesting. They make sure and tell you that they take creative liberties. They take some pretty significant creative liberties, and I won't I won't try to ruin the story for you because it's not real anyway. It's not the way it happened. But for instance, David, I've learned in the first 2 episodes, they try to make it out that Jesse's other children were born to a different mother, and that David's mother died being killed by a lion protecting David. And I mean, it's like, okay, some pretty major creative liberties there, but some things are pretty on top. I mean, I was impressed by in the first episode, you're going to see Saul make his big mistake. I mean, he made many mistakes, right? But the big one that changed the course of history for the people of Israel was when he was battling the Amalekites. And God said, and that was King Agag. That's a great name, right? King Agag. You always remember that one because it's not that, it's just kind of a weird name. In House of David, Agag's actually a cannibal. They turn him into a cannibal, and he looks like an animal. I mean, he looks scary. But he was told, you're going to wipe out the Amalekites. And you're not just going to wipe out the people. You're going to kill King Agag, and you're going to wipe out all the stuff they've got, all their animals, everything. So what does Saul do, right? We all know this story, I think. He doesn't listen to what Samuel told him to do. He takes a lot of the plunder and gives it to the people, and he actually spares King Agag. And, in Saul's mind, I think Saul in his mind thought, obviously, I don't know that, again, I don't know what Saul's thinking, but I get the impression that he's just thinking, my people are going to be pleased because I did this for them. I'm giving them all this spoil from what happened. And I don't know, but when I read that, I just don't get the impression that he's doing this to spite God or to spite Samuel, but specifically spite God. I don't know his heart, obviously, but Samuel comes to him, and it's a great scene in the movie or in the miniseries. It's like, you messed up. He just says it right there, and the kingdom is not going to be yours anymore. God's going to send me to anoint a new king, and it's going to be taken from you. And then in the miniseries, what Samuel do, I think, actually, I have to go back and look at it again, but I believe he does. Does he kill King Agag? I think Samuel does. So it's a graphic scene. Samuel walks out of telling Saul this, grabs a big something ironed, I guess, and hacks King Agag to death right there in front of people. And again, it's a pretty impressive scene. So again, if you have time and you're looking for something to watch, you can change the next slide. I would encourage you to watch it. I think it'd be interesting, and you'll want to go back to your Bible and look and see what's really historical and what's the creative liberties that were taken. Let me get here. Next slide. Okay, David. So this 1 Samuel 16:1. This is obviously what I just talked about. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons." And we know that story too. And I'm going to paraphrase it, but Samuel goes and he sees all these sons of Jesse, and there's some guys that look like, strapping young men or whatever, and it's got to be this guy. It's got to be this guy. And it's over and over. No, this is not the guy. And then finally, it's the shepherd boy. He's the guy, and he's the guy that's going to be king. And then I went to Luke 2 here just to put in here. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David. We think of the city of David really as Jerusalem, but obviously Bethlehem, because he was from there, gets attributed as well sometimes as the city of David. But David being from Bethlehem, he's definitely the prominent Old Testament character that we read about from Bethlehem. And of course it makes sense that Jesus, and it makes sense because it was prophesied, and that we'll talk about that next. It was prophesied, and that's what God said was going to happen. But it does make sense that Jesus, the ultimate king, but not an earthly king, a heavenly king, would come from the same town, or be born in the same town as David, the greatest king of Israel, and the man after God's own heart. And I do think it's worth reflecting again on David. Of all the mistakes he made, he was still a man after God's own heart. In the next slide here, thank you, Lance. Bethlehem prophecy, Micah 5:2. The prophet Micah, he says, "But as for you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity." This prediction was made, from my understanding, probably about 700 years before Jesus' birth. And it's interesting, not only does he predict this great person coming from Bethlehem, but interesting how he talks about his goings are from long ago, from the days of eternity. And what that takes me to is John chapter 1. I think about Jesus, and we're talking about this in the Holy Spirit class now on Wednesday nights that Clay's leading, about the Trinity and a better understanding of that. But Jesus was man, he was God, and Jesus has been since the beginning, which is from eternity. He is God. And he was there in the creation. He has been there all this time. And we see him specifically, and we know the most about, and that's one thing we talked about in that class. We really know the most of the Trinity. We know the most about Jesus, right? I mean, that's what we understand the most, because he was here and he lived among us and he walked among us, and that's who we know the most of. Or if we understand God, I think we understand God the most through Jesus, and that's, I believe, how God intended it to be. He's our Savior. He understands us because he lived as one of us, yet he was God. But I do like that Micah makes mention of that as well. But, this is, again, I'm going to, with the Lord's Supper, I have the opportunity to lead Lord's Supper today. And I always go back to Corinthians, the Corinthian letter in chapter, I think it's 1 Corinthians 15. I've got it already marked but it's probably my favorite passage in the Bible, where Paul talks about, if the dead are not, if dead are not raised and Christ is not raised, then, our faith is in vain, right? I mean, he just cuts it to the plain and simple, is if Christ didn't come and die for us, and if he wasn't raised for the dead, we're all pretty pathetic because we're here right now, because none of it means anything. Our meaning is through those events. I mean, the meaning of life. Otherwise life is just some accident. That's what it is. But Paul makes it clear, and the Zondervan Bible says, it kind of puts the heading, Paul laying out facts. He's laying out facts that this happened. We talk about truth, we talk about facts all the time. And, you get this phrase, I don't really like this phrase, but it's everywhere now. Paul's bringing the receipts. He's bringing them right there and saying, here it is. I've got them. This is what happened. And I think that's it. But our faith can be so strengthened by what we see in Micah and what we see in Isaiah and the prophets. And again, I'll reflect on another class I've been in recently, the Daniel class in the winter quarter with Brandon, who did a nice job. The prophecies in Daniel about how this world is going to change with each kingdom. I mean, it's so amazing. And how could you not see Jesus in this passage? Or how can you not see the history of the different empires as Daniel lays it out so amazingly clear that this is going to happen, and hundreds of years before these things happen. Prophecy is so amazing. And, we have this great prophecy about Jesus coming from Bethlehem. Next slide, please. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I don't think I have 15 minutes of stuff to talk about, so I think we're definitely going to get out early. But I'm going to close, obviously, with Bethlehem and Jesus. And again, I'm going to highlight that I find it interesting. We don't read really anything about Bethlehem after these passages, and where he was born, and where the wise man and the shepherds visit, and the wise men visit Bethlehem after initially coming to Herod to try to figure out things, where to go. And we don't read anything else about it. pretty much all the others, obviously all the other cities we're talking about. We talked about Bethany last week. I think next week is Capernaum or maybe Bethsaida. But all the other cities we're going to talk about are cities where Jesus, was involved in his ministry after he became of age, was baptized by John the Baptizer, and then went on into his ministry. But Bethlehem, this is all we've got. So its prominence is totally, in our minds, its prominence is all about Jesus' birth. And, we don't really have anything else to go on beyond that. And I do want to read, and I just think for the closing, we're going to read some of these passages together, and we can certainly talk about them, but we've read a lot of these passages recently. We've talked extensively about Jesus' birth. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that again, but I do want to at least read Luke 2, 1 through 7 about the birth of Christ, and maybe say a couple of things, and then as the lesson will be yours. So Luke 2, and we're going to go, we're going to go 1 through 7 here, and let's start with, get it in front of me on both sides. Now in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken of all the inhabited earth. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David. Next slide. In order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him as with child. And while we're there, the days were completed for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Again, Jesus born to a virgin, Mary, Joseph. We don't know much about him, but we know what we know. We know that he was a good guy. I mean, he took Mary. He did not put her away, even though, the optics of things would not have been good. He did not. He stayed faithful to her in the sense of supporting her, and ultimately she has the child. And we do know that they had other children. Jesus did have siblings subsequently, but she completed what she was called to do, and it's an amazing story that the Savior of the world was born in such a humble manner. And again, we reflect on it. Certainly the world reflects on it every year as around Christmas time, as Daniel talked about last week. If you really look at the data, it doesn't seem to indicate that Jesus was born in December, but we are happy that people reflect on it every year around that time. But certainly it's something we reflect on a regular basis, the amazing nature of his birth, and then ultimately, what he did for us. The other passage that I'm going to just read here briefly, just as we have time, just because the wise men passage in Matthew 2, and I don't have the scriptures up there, but I am going to read that passage. And that's Matthew 2, 1 through 12, and then we'll close for the day with this lesson. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Reflecting on the prophet Micah. Then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. And when you have found him, report to me so that I too may come and worship him." We know that's not Herod what he intended, right? After hearing the king, they went their way, and the star which they had seen in the east went on before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. After coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way. We don't know how many there were. Everybody says 3 wise men, right? We know that there were 3 different gifts, but I don't know how many wise men there were. We just know there were men, so there were clearly at least a couple. I don't know, there could have been 3 or 4. You don't necessarily have to just say, I'm bringing the frankincense, I'm bringing the gold, I got the myrrh. They could have said, I'm bringing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, I don't. If somebody wants to say, I think there were 3 wise men, they can say, I think there were 3 wise men. But it's another to just create everything that looks like there were 3. There were only 3. Susan. Yeah. Yeah. Right. 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 At that time. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. 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 Yeah, I think, when you're teaching or doing any kind of presentations about the Bible, you can say, I will say sometimes, I hypothesize, or I wonder, I was talking about Saul. I wonder if Saul, my impression, again, that's opinion. And if you say that, I think it's okay to say you have an opinion about something, but as you said, don't make it fact. And if it's not in there. And I remember in Christian college, going to Bible classes and certain topics would come up and a professor would say, this is the way it is. I'm like, I don't see anything that says that exactly. I mean, you may be right, but don't lay it out as fact when it's not clearly stated. Again, you may be right. You're entitled to your opinion on that because it's not a matter of and we have in the Bible what we need. We have what we need. And I think Susan, again, if you didn't hear, just making the point that it can be hard for non-believers or maybe folks that are just early on in their faith when you talk about things in the Bible as being fact, and then they look at that and say, well, that's not there that way. And so then that can create some problems there in their faith when they see people aren't necessarily looking at Scripture accurately. So it's important. I agree. But I honestly, I never picked up that closely until recently, the idea of the wise men when they come, they're not there. Like you said, you kind of in your mind, even though you read it, you still think of them being there at the same time, like right after in the manger. And that's not the case at all. I mean, there's too much time going on here for that to happen. So it doesn't make any sense. Rick. Yeah. Right. Who knows? Yeah. Right. Yeah, we don't know the time frame there, but again, and really, as I said, after that story, no more Bethlehem, to my knowledge. Nothing else in there. Bible Atlas. You search Bethlehem, it gives you every passage where Bethlehem is mentioned, and you hit Luke chapter 2 and Matthew 2, and that's it. You don't have anything else about Bethlehem beyond that. So, but you had something to say there, Betty, it looked like. Oh, that's all right. We all have those. Yeah, Joseph and Mary. Right, exactly. Yeah. Right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And exactly, keep it simple. And that's the thing that comes up when you try to make modern, I'm not modern interpretations, I guess, but you try to make historically accurate stories or presentations of Bible history. And I hadn't seen I don't know of much of any that don't take a lot of creative liberties, right? And I'm at least glad that in this particular one I was talking about today, they make sure the first screen you see is, we took a lot of creative liberties here. So if you go to the Bible, you're not going to find some of this stuff. But it can create problems too for people that, if you're watching that for the first time, and you're gonna be kind of surprised when you get to the story of David and find out, wait a second, where did this come from? It's like, it doesn't make any sense at all. So, but we have to know we have what we need, is what Betty was saying, and focus on that. So, well, I'm gonna close right there. And again, 4 minutes early. Lance, thanks for turning slides for me. And I hope you have a great, spring feels like it's about to spring. I guess it hasn't sprung, but it feels like it's about to spring. So enjoy your week. Thanks so much.